Hi, Anna. You look wonderful.
You. So do you.
Oh, I'm doing kind of the scruffy beard thing these days,
Oh, yes, it's very popular.
which I couldn't do in my TV news days,
I know. There's
nor
a
could
lot
I do
there's
the
a lot
earring.
you can do in your TV news days.
You see my earring?
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Do you know when I got that?
No, the day after you quit?
No, like within 45 minutes of leaving the office. Jill, my wife, picked me up when we had and I was all done with the newscast and the little goodbye thing in the newsroom.
Oh my gosh.
And we went straight to what is it, the Pagoda Hut or something like that.
Yeah,
And I got my little diamond earring.
that is hilarious.
And people ask me about it now,
Right?
and I just say it's a reminder to me that I did my 31 years in TV where they wouldn't let me have an earring, and now I can have it.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Uh,
I love it.
well, I'm so happy to be talking with you because look, most people I just sit down and I kind of chat from memory things.
Yeah.
Look at all the list of things I wanted to ask you about.
I was really going to say, I'm kind of nervous. I don't like being on this end of things. I'm used to being the person asking the questions. I do
No.
not like being the one answering them.
Oh, hey, so let's start with tell me, I know a little bit, but tell us about the expert show that you've been doing for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, it's been so much fun. I just realized toward the end of my traditional news career that one of the things I really loved was meeting people who were experts in their fields. Like you would meet a brilliant scientist or this genius engineer in the course of doing a daily story or even like a long form investigative piece. And I always found myself wanting to be able to share more of what that expert had in their head. Like
Mm-hmm.
they devoted their entire life to, becoming the expert in said field. And I always wanted more. So I developed a format in which I could do half-hour long videos with experts on a variety of topics. So it's very lifestyle oriented. It's how to live smarter, healthier, and happier. I felt like that was something that it was a niche that I wanted to help fill. And it's been a blast. Kind of scary, to branch out and do your own thing, but I was very fortunate to develop a partnership with the Oregonian to get more eyes on the show. And I feel like, I've spent 2 years sharing a lot of good information with
Yeah, it's kind of like a TED Talk for the commoners.
people. Yes.
Because it is really useful stuff, and I mean it's interesting, useful, and you have a way of bringing things out of people that's very personable instead of some guy on the stage saying, "What if I told you that climate change was X, Y, Z?"
Talk, like TED Talks are great, but they're one-sided. It's a one-sided conversation. So the other aspect of it that I found really fun and interesting is the ability to engage with a live audience who's watching with you, to put out the information that here's who I'm interviewing, here's the topic we're talking about, even in advance of the show, so that if people have questions, they can either post them or private message them to me. I really like that it's more of a dialogue and
Yeah.
not unilateral conversation with an expert.
And it happens on OregonLive's website. It's a live specific time, right? It's not just like my podcast is taped. You can listen to it anytime you want, right?
Yeah, it's Mondays at 7 p.m., but you can always go back and watch the replays if you don't, catch
Yeah.
the actual live broadcast too. I think
Good.
there's part of it that, like, I was in live TV for almost 2 decades, so I enjoy the energy of doing something live.
Yeah.
There's a different level of when it's live. I can't really explain it that well.
Well, congratulations on finding that niche, and that's very, a very useful niche for people, and being able to continue helping the community with the information you're getting out there. I think all of us, when we're in TV news, are a little afraid of what am I going to do next, and everybody lands on their feet, and you certainly did with the expert show, I think.
Well, I feel fortunate. And part of it for me is, I became a mom while also being a journalist. but I still really value the skills that I built up as a journalist. Like I devoted, I knew I wanted to be a journalist from the time that I was 9 years old. So it felt weird that I would have to just stop using journalism skills and stop using interviewing skills once I was no longer working full time in the industry. So I think a lot of people can relate to, different stages in their life where they still want to continue utilizing and building the skills that they, were using prior to becoming a parent, or whatever milestone event, was a turning point in their life.
So what was that milestone event at the age of 9?
You know what's so funny? I grew up, I didn't know until I was older that English was my second language, until I watched a recording of myself on Ramblin' Rod when I was 5 years old, and I was speaking in broken English. I didn't realize I had a Chinese accent because I was born in Taiwan, and I immigrated to the US with my family when I was 2. So here I was on Ramblin' Rod trying to tell him what school I go to. And
let me just say that Rod Anders, as great as he was as a TV host for kids, was not a linguistic master.
He had a really good time with it, which looking back is hilarious because he was like, wait, what school do you go to? And he couldn't quite understand what I was saying. So I realized that I grew up learning English watching Three's Company and Peter Jennings. So,
two different ends of the spectrum.
The world news was always a part of my life growing up. It was important to me. I was probably watching way too serious content at too young of an age, but I just admired, ABC World News, and eventually that became a love for Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs in 2020. And I don't know, I was interviewed by Jeff Gianola when I was 9 because I was a Rose Festival princess for Park Rose, and he was the MC for the Queen coronation. So I remember talking to him and meeting him and thinking that seemed like a really cool job. And then later on in life, I had the good fortune of being interviewed by Paul Lindman when I was in high school, and expressed to him an interest in TV news. And he was kind enough to invite me down to KATU for a job shadow. And I watched a newscast with
You're hooked then.
Memory, yeah. And I was hooked. I mean, I was first just starstruck at the whole idea that this is how TV news is made. And then as I, wrote for the school newspaper in Park Rose, and then went on into college to study journalism, I really developed this love for storytelling, but not just storytelling with words, but with pictures and sound. Like the whole idea of it was really exciting to me, and it still excites me, Yeah.
So were you lucky enough? I know that, you worked for an ABC affiliate, and I know that Peter Jennings came to town once or twice. Were you lucky enough to be able to interact with him when he came to KATU Studios?
You know what's funny? It always happened when I was away on vacation or
No!
I was never around. So I always heard the stories, but I never actually got to meet him in person.
That's probably a good thing, instead of walking up. So I watched you when I was 9 years old, and I always wanted to be a reporter, and he probably wouldn't have cared at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. People say that to me sometimes now. They're like, oh, I remember watching you when I was 10 years old. I was like, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, kind of. Yeah. Well, I'm similar. I mean, I think my interest was first in sports reporting and being a baseball play-by-play guy, because my dad watched a lot of sports at home, but we watched the evening news either at the dinner table or that, and so I was exposed that way as well to storytelling and the importance of news. And from pretty early on, like I said, I wanted to start in sports, but I ended up in news as well. So that exposure early on had a deep impact on both of us.
Yeah. It's really, I feel really fortunate to have gone on and worked in the industry that I loved so much, and to have met the people that I met on the job, both in the field, but also the incredible camaraderie that comes with being in a newsroom and working with photographers and the whole team of producers and editors that it takes behind the scenes to get a newscast on the air in a manner that is presentable.
Yeah. Well, and
It's
you
awesome.
mentioned the people you meet, and we always get to do stories, and they're always interesting. But one of the benefits of this job is where you get to go behind the scenes and who you get to talk to, and maybe an eighth of that may make it on the air, but all the things you learn or are exposed to on a day-to-day basis is just fascinating. More
I
fascinating than standing in front of a camera.
Yeah, and they're fascinating in like great ways and sometimes horrible ways. Like you
Hmm.
meet people on the most extraordinary day of their life, and but it can be extraordinary in a positive way, and it could be extraordinarily tragic. So in that way, I feel like it is a privilege to be with them in those circumstances, and it's a job that requires a lot of compassion and understanding and just to kind of remember that yes, you're there to do a job, but you're also human and you're
Yeah.
dealing with another human being. You're not just dealing with somebody who you want to get a soundbite out of. Like I think that's always what was in my head when I encountered people in various circumstances.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that because the best day, the most exciting day of somebody's life, you may be there, and also in the most tragic. I have a friend whose son died in a military accident, and I'd gotten we found out about it in the newsroom, and I gotten a call from a friend of the friend, and I ended up talking to them on the phone and coming out and do an interview with these family friends of mine about their son they had lost, and I had this. Obviously I had the contact to be able to interview them, but I also felt some kind of value in being the one to interview them so I could kind of walk them through it. I mean, I think it was more comforting for them that I was there to help tell this story that they were going to have to tell that they didn't want to. It was a horrible thing to go through, but at the same time, I felt some value in being the one to be there with them.
Yeah, definitely. And, that can even happen with strangers. Like the
Yes.
story that comes to mind is David Heller, the Central Catholic high school player who, unbeknownst to all of us, had a heart condition, an enlarged heart, and went home from a practice or a game and went to sleep that night and never woke up. This was right around Thanksgiving. And, you know, how the news happens. You get a press release about someone dying and you get a name and then it's somebody's job to make that phone call or to go knock on a door of someone, a family that has just lost their loved one. And it's the call that you never want to make as a reporter, but sometimes you have to make it because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And it's tricky because people have a hard time understanding that. Of course, you want to respect people's privacy, but in some circumstances, you meet a family like the Hellers who, on the other end of the phone, said, yeah, come on out to our house. We want you to know about David. We want you to know how he died. They recognized within days of his death that it was a public service to talk about how he died in case there were other student athletes out there with undiagnosed heart conditions. Like his mom was a nurse and didn't even know that he
Hmm.
had this going on because he had been more or less asymptomatic up until his death. And so it was remarkable to go out to their home in Scappoose within days after he died, have them tell me the full story of what had happened, have them open their hearts to me and tell me about this amazing kid that I wish I had known. And then to watch them take that tragedy and develop a nonprofit that now helps pay for defibrillators to go into high schools and on road trips with teams. And they did cardiac screenings and they found so many abnormalities in student athletes and likely saved dozens more lives as a result of what happened to their son. So in that circumstance, you are, fortunate. It's not how you want to meet people, but you can work together to help make something beautiful come out of something that truly is tragic.
And if you don't make that phone call or you don't make that uncomfortable knock on the door, it may never happen. But then if you are lucky enough to be a skilled reporter that can go there and make that experience for them comfortable enough that they can move on, then again, it's a horrible place to be. but you can do so much good if you do it right.
And there's a lot of ways to do it wrong.
Oh gosh, yes.
There can be, it's really hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it, but there can be an odd catharsis in talking to somebody you've never met about the loved one that you just lost, in the way that you want them to be remembered. Because there is, I guess in some small way, it can be empowering to say, this is how I want this person who was special to be remembered. I want the world to know, why this person was incredible. And so I do feel very blessed to have been there and had those conversations with people who wanted to have them.
Did you did an internship at KATU or had some kind of fellowship, didn't you, when you were at Pepperdine, I think, when you were in college?
Yeah, so I was at Pepperdine and I first interned at KBC in LA. So I got to see what a #2 market newsroom looks like. It was crazy, nuts, just nuts. I was like answering the assignment desk phone and watching the assignment manager go through the list of murders from the night before to decide which one to cover. Like, I don't, how do you make that decision? Which murder had something a little odd about it? It was very eye-opening. And then the summer of my junior year, I came back and did an internship at KATU that had a scholarship attached to it. So it was actually a paid internship.
Awesome. And then did you come right out of college to KATU after that? I mean, I'm sure you impressed the folks at KATU, right?
You know what's funny is I had a job lined up in Midland, Texas. That's where I'm going to go take my first job as a news reporter out of college, Midland, Texas. And I remember Mindy Davis at KATU, who was the human resources specialist, calling me and saying, hey, I think we're going to make up a position for you. We're going to call you reporter trainee. We've never done this before.
That's how I got hired.
That's how I got hired. I was hired on kind of an interim 6-month basis to see if I could be ready to go on air in 6 months. Gary Walker, who was the interim news director at the time, would be reviewing my footage, my live shots, or my, stand-ups to see if I was not too green to go on air. And they were trying something new, because by the end of my internship at KATU, the good part about it was that it was so loosely structured that by the end I was going out with photographers on my own, doing all the interviews, writing the packages, and then just handing the package to an anchor to voice. And then I had that story for myself, for my own reel.
Yeah.
So I was pretty comfortable with that, with the help of a lot of people who taught me how to write well and, not make a fool of myself, like Matt Griffin and Sam and April Thomas, all these folks who would look over my scripts, and Gary Walker, obviously, who would, help me realize what a broadcast script actually should look and sound like. And then, it was only about, I think, 3 to 4 months into that 6-month reporter trainee period that there was a crash on the Ross Island Bridge. It was a Friday afternoon. There was no one in the newsroom. Everybody was out on assignment already. And they needed someone to go live in Jet Ranger 2 to talk about the crash at the top of the show.
Lead story, live, and you're in a helicopter.
Hometown, no less. So I was like, Gary, come on, let me do it. What's the worst that can happen? Honestly, come on, just take a chance, He's not all blotchy like Gary does. And he finally was like, fine, just go do it. Don't embarrass us.
Don't embarrass us.
And my eyes are as big as deer in headlights. I start to hyperventilate because I'm so nervous. My throat chokes up. I can't get any words out. And I realize we're flying over the crash, and I'm describing in detail the crash itself and what had happened. I don't think it was a fatal. And then I just remember Gary getting in my ear on a headset going, talk about the traffic around the crash. The story is not the crash itself. The story is how it is impacting rush hour traffic at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was like, oh, and the traffic, oh, this is
There you go.
Live local TV news.
Well, when I started at KGW, or it's probably still now, it was an after union shop. I don't know, K2 wasn't when we were there together, but there was an actual position in the contract called reporter trainee where they could hire somebody with less than 2 years experience, pay them dirt,
Yes.
And could do that for a year. So I was that for a year. I mean, I got paid nothing for my first year there, and then after that, you were moved up in the contract to a regular reporter's salary.
Oh, I
So
see. I love that. Okay.
yeah,
So very similar beginnings, although
yes.
James is a little more structured
But
than.
I was on the air from point one. I mean, that was an on the air position. It was not like a tryout. It was just a position where they could not pay somebody a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, that was fortunate. I mean, I will always be grateful to Mark Hass and Rhonda Shelby, and Gary for advocating for me, to even have that opportunity, because I knew even back then how precious it was,
Yeah.
start in a market like Portland, as green as I was.
Yeah, but the cream comes to the top. They find people that know what they're doing, and you get them some good training. You work with good people, and you can make an advancement in your case, and I think in my case as well, where we could get up to the right caliber that we, as you said, not embarrassing them. Don't embarrass us.
Yeah, well, I mean, the not so glamorous portions of that job, I was just taking every shift that nobody else wanted to work. So I was working overnights, I was writing, I was sitting with James Wilms, because I guess on the weekends, overnights, they were reducing costs by not running the heater. So James and I would be sitting there like bundled up in parkas, preparing the morning newscast on the weekends.
Budget cuts.
But that was me paying my dues and trying to get my foot in the door, and just being present at the station as much as possible.
That's interesting, Anna, because I've done maybe 30 or 35 of these podcast interviews with a lot of people who've been very successful. And, Kathy Smith, Paul Lindman, Jack McGowan, all these people who have been superstars in this market, it's all the same story. I'll do anything. I'll work any shift. I'll do whatever I can, and I'll show you that I can do the job. So you're certainly fit into that category of people that worked their butts off to get where they were. Um, so you became an outstanding investigative reporter, and I mean, there are a lot of news reporters, but to be an investigative reporter, to be trusted with those kind of stories and work is really important in a newsroom. How did you get to that point? How did you learn to be an investigative reporter?
I don't know that there was any formal process to it. I just know that I would do stories, like daily turn stories, that I felt like needed more coverage. Like I was limited by the minute and a half that I had to tell that story. And I was struggling to try and jam more information in. And I would always feel like there were certain stories that really warranted more digging. Like, you would come across things in the course of doing a day turn story that were like, that doesn't seem right. Like, what's going on there? Or you would do an interview with somebody who would surprise you, because you would ask a normal question and suddenly they would be obfuscating, and they would be like getting dodgy or doing a no comment. And it was always a red flag. It was like, wait, why are you being all weird about this? So it was just kind of probably born more from my natural curiosity to be annoying and a little bit of a gadfly, and try to dig a little more to figure out what was really going on. And then as I learned more about investigative reporting and, the beauty of documents and what those can reveal, and just developing sources, like developing people who are in positions of power, who come to trust you and want to tell you things that are happening within an entity that are wrong and unjust. It furthered my love for journalism, because I was like, well, this is what we're meant to do as journalists. We're supposed to hold the powerful accountable. We're supposed to give, a voice to the voiceless. And it really I was very motivated, by that aspect of the job, and being able to affect lives and change laws and, help right wrongs in a big way. Like, I don't know, there was something innate in me that just had a passion for that.
So pick one out. I know you did a lot, but give me the anatomy of a really good story about how you found it from the source, what you checked, what you found, as far as documents and from A to B to where, oftentimes those stories then have to go before management and lawyers to make sure that we got it right. Uh, Tell me a story that really made a difference that you're proud of.
You know, I was always drawn to stories that involved children for whatever reason. And a story that I found really compelling is the story of Jordan Clark. So he was a little boy who went to a local hospital. He had a congenital heart defect, but other than that, he was actually normal physically and mentally. So he went as an infant to get his heart defect repaired. But in recovery, as an infant, his breathing tube slipped out of place. So he lost oxygen to his brain for, I think, 12 minutes. And so it was life-changing for him. Here was a boy that was now going to have a shortened life because of his situation, who could no longer be verbal. And the thing that, medical mistakes occur, but this particular situation was really difficult for that family and others like them, because the entity they went to actually had a $200,000 cap on liability damages. So if something catastrophic happened to you while you were a patient at this hospital, because they had it essentially written into law that you could only sue them for $200,000. I mean, Jordan Clark's medical costs over his lifetime would be $11 million, even a shortened lifespan. And so what you have is families who have terrible things happen to them, who don't know that this tort cap existed, but also who couldn't get any medical malpractice attorney to want to represent them in a case against this hospital.
Because there was nothing to make any money for the attorneys at the $200,000 cap or whatever it was, right?
It's not even, in these days, it's not even enough to bring the case, because you have to pay the expert witnesses to testify as well. And so they were really in a bind. And I was finding that there were other people in that situation. And so as I started to talk with Jordan Clark and his family and realized that this was a far-reaching issue, I just learned a lot more about it. I was able to follow the case. They did wind up, filing suit, and their case went all the way to the Oregon Supreme Court. And that tort cap was eventually overturned.
Right.
And the important part of that litigation was also that the hospital had to notify patients when they were coming in for treatment that this tort cap exists. This particular entity is a public-private entity, so they get state funding, but they also operate in many senses like a private corporation. It's one of the only entities in the state that is considered a public corporation. It's in a very interesting category.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really took value in bringing light to that situation and covering it through, and working with this family, because they knew that by continuing through the process, it wasn't really just for them. It was going to be for a lot of other patients down the line who would have things happen to them.
Yeah, that's a great way to have a strong effect on our community in the future. And the story, it's a great story for the day, and we can tease it and we can headline it and all that kind of stuff, but it has an impact, the correct impact going forward. And that's the essence of what you want to do as a journalist.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And that impact can come in a lot of different forms. Like one of the things I'm most proud of is a series that I did for a year or so, where I featured a different foster kid each month. And sometimes it wasn't one kid, sometimes it was 5 siblings who were all looking to be adopted. And it was very fulfilling to be able to tell this kid's story in a pretty substantive way about saying, no, this is who this kid is. This is what they're about. Is there anyone out there who wants to give them a forever family?
And
And
I'm guessing most of them or all of them did find a family.
most of them did.
So now, isn't that funny? Is you got these people living their lives out there, and not thinking about child X that's sitting there needing a home, but you get the story in front of them, told well. Adoption happens. People find families. So again, the power of storytelling. If the story doesn't get told, it doesn't happen.
It's true. I mean, one of the kids was a 17-year-old girl. She was on her way out of the system, and she was just going to be kind of cast into the wind. And as a 17-year-old, she was adopted by a couple who saw the story in Texas.
Nice. And that's beautiful. Um, let's see. I did want to ask you about, probably the biggest story of that time period was the Ward Weaver, Amanda Gaddis, Ashley Pond story that overtook us all for, a couple of months. I know you were really involved in covering that. And unfortunately, you were face to face with that guy a few times,
Yeah,
weren't
a number of times.
you? As good as you feel about some of the other great impacts you've had with your stories, that's got to be one that you kind of cringe being around a man that took the lives of two girls.
Yeah. It definitely haunts me now because I think about what he did and what happened to those girls, and the fact that I had the opportunity to meet Miranda Gaddis before she disappeared, because I actually interviewed her at the school bus stop after Ashley Pond disappeared. So I had this conversation with Miranda about how strange it was that her friend and classmate was gone, and how nervous it made her and how scary it was. And so then when the news came out 2 months later in March that she had disappeared, I couldn't believe it. I saw her picture and I said, I talked to that girl.
Yeah. Ouch.
Had the raw footage. And so that aspect of it, working with the families over an 8-month time period until he was finally arrested, was very emotional. But in the same way that I felt like I was playing a part and serving a role, I don't regret at all continuing to put pressure on the Weaver family to try and figure out what was going on. I don't regret, interviewing him. Like the story, it's kind of crazy because we initially heard about him via an email, an anonymous email that came into the newsroom that said, you really should look into the bushy-haired neighbor at the top of the hill in Oregon City on Beaver Creek there, because the girls lived in Newell Creek Apartments down the hill. And I was like, bushy-haired neighbor. And at this time, our news director had said, I want you to be the expert on this case. I want you to do a story about the missing girls every day until there's resolution. So I remember taking the email and going after work one day and driving out to Oregon City in my green Honda Civic and looking around and realizing there's only one house at the top of the hill, knocking on the door and having the conversation with Ward Weaver about, why are we getting emails about you?
You did that without a camera?
Just by myself.
Oh, Anna, in retrospect, I would like to scold you for doing that, but
yeah. And so it's kind of crazy now thinking back, but he just said, well, yeah, he went on about how he had flunked the polygraph test, and that's why everybody was saying he was the main suspect, but I should really come back and get the full story. I was like, okay, what time do you want to talk with a camera? And so we made an arrangement to talk the next morning at 7 a.m. before he went to his job in the shipping department at some, industrial place. And so that's when I went back out with a photographer the next morning to do the interview with him. And it was, it's kind of crazy to think back now and think like, wow, we were sitting in his house. He knew the truth. he thought he was smarter than everybody and could tell a story that we would all believe. He walked me over this concrete slab where he had already buried Ashley Pond. He stood in front of this stand-up freezer, which we later learned contained Miranda Gaddis's body at some point. And so he just was fully taunting us. So yeah, obviously that aspect of it is very sad and eerie. But again, I'm glad that we continue to put pressure on him, because ultimately, I don't know really exactly what role we played ultimately in his arrest, but I have to think it mattered some.
I was at KGW during that time, and I remember, I believe you were either asked or you did. Did you speak at their memorial service?
Yeah.
And I remember us talking about whether or not that was a good idea, like it mattered to us. I mean, what was involved in your decision as a journalist to speak at that service?
I think the hardest part for me was that the families had asked me to speak at the service, the families of the girls.
Yeah.
And I didn't really want to be honest, because I didn't want to be part of the story. And I think by speaking at the service, I was like becoming part of the story that way. So I was young. I got a lot of help from the managers at KATU in figuring out what to say. They really supported the idea of me speaking at the service. And then there was part of me that felt inclined to do it because the families were the ones asking me to do it.
Yes.
So it was really hard. Like, I'm not sure that I would go back and make the same decision again. Um, the blowback was a little rough for a young journalist. I was only 23, maybe 22, 23. And I remember there being a pretty critical column written about me, like in the LA Times or something. And I was devastated, that here I was being criticized as the journalist who broke the golden rule, when really the basis of all that for me was my heart for
Yeah.
these families and what they had gone through. And I was encouraged by the community itself, because I got a lot of, like, hundreds of emails and letters from people who were thanking me for being compassionate and not being this reporter that was just kind of like reporting on this story from another planet. But yeah, it was an interesting lesson to learn at such a young age.
Yeah, and I don't know what the right or wrong answer is there. And you talked about the different things that you're weighing on there, but going through that helps you develop uh, a thick skin, but B, just a process by which to make future decisions involved in that. And by virtue of your career, most of the decisions you made about how to be a strong journalist were really good ones. I can say for a fact.
Yeah, it was a tough one. I mean, even on the day that, like, the bodies were found, like, it was a really hot 90-degree day in late
oh,
August. We'd been out there for the better part of like 48 hours because the fences had gone up on the property. The FBI had moved in and they were searching for the bodies. And none of us really knew for sure what they were going to find and if they were going to find anything. And here we'd gone for 8 months with sort of this ambiguity of, well, maybe there's still a chance that the girls are still alive and this is all a big misunderstanding somehow. But when the medical examiner's van pulled up, that's when I knew as a journalist that they were not coming home. And I remember breaking down, in part because of exhaustion and heat, and but also because this was really a culmination of 8 months of wondering. And I was embarrassed that I cried on camera. I thought that was the end of my job, because I had always been trained in journalism school. You stay objective, you're not supposed to show your feelings, but I couldn't help it. It was involuntary. And that was another instance where I just thought, gosh, this is it. I'm not going to work again. But I was, again, very encouraged by people who wrote in and called in and said, hey, thanks for being a reporter who has a heart.
yeah. Uh, I was out there that day too. Now I hadn't covered the story the way that you had, because let's see, I think I was anchoring the morning news, but I was working a weekend shift that at that time, and we were on the air from like 9 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It was like snow coverage, but it was about the deaths of two girls because there was that scene with the fences and there were people walking by and leaving mementos, and I mean it was live coverage of just that for 8 or 9 hours and interviewing, people that had just come to see it and curiosity, because there was nobody from the FBI. Very rarely was somebody from the FBI coming out and telling us what was going on. We were just sitting there, and I was exhausted too at the end of the day. I just collapsed. I had nothing left to give because
Yeah.
I'd interviewed so many people. I wasn't the only one. We had like, 3 or 4 crews out there and reporters, and they would just bounce from one to the other, all doing the same thing, just talking about this fence and these flowers and these people. And it was emotionally just incredibly draining.
It was, and we, KATU went on air. We broke in on that Friday night at 9:45. We continued broadcasting until about 1 in the morning. So we broke in as the fences were going up on the property because we got a tip that was happening. And then the next morning, we broke from coverage and we started the morning coverage early in the morning, 5 or 6 a.m., and continued all the way through until midnight that next day.
Yeah.
And then the next morning, same thing, early in the morning until well after 11 p.m. at night. So yeah, it was a lot of grief collectively that we were all a part of, None of us really knew these girls. A few of us really knew these girls and the lives that they had even prior to being kidnapped and murdered. But for whatever reason, we felt like we knew them. They were part of our community, and
We were invested.
we were.
Yeah. So now I'm excited to say this because now I'm a podcaster and I listen to all these podcasts where they're interviewing people, and they always say, you got a hard out, because the celebrity has to go do something else. So what is your hard out today? Because I know you got a radio show to join.
My hard out today is that yes, I go join my husband John on the radio, which I don't know how this even happened, but this was like start of the pandemic. He started doing the radio show from home, so I would just pop in occasionally.
And now it's a regular bit, right?
Oh, it's a regular bit. I'm somehow on a sports radio show, and I know like this much about sports, and it's through osmosis.
Oh, well, see, the cool thing about a good radio sports talk show is when it's not about sports. And I think, and I know John's is a great show and he does some great interviews, but it's the other stuff that happens that interests me. And I think the interaction between husband and wife, and again, intelligent, really strong sports journalist husband and intelligent, really strong, compassionate journalist wife, Anna. I've heard it a few times, and it makes a much better sports show than worrying about how many points Damian scored the night before.
Yeah, I mean, half the time we're on there arguing about like parenting strategies or, how much gear we need to go on this camping trip that John doesn't really want to go on. So
yeah.
I mean, at the very least, while we've been in this pandemic, I hope that at 2:00 every day, there are some people that we can bring a smile to their face and be entertained and be like, okay, yeah, we have a lot of the same issues that we have in our family as well.
So I want to know how this intrepid investigative journalist meets a sports columnist. Where did this happen?
It's through work. I think I had to do a story about the Blazers, and he had some facts about the arena and the team and what they were worth. That it was one of those days where you come into work and they say, hey, so-and-so wrote this story in the Oregonian, you need to do a follow-up on that story, which, as you know,
I hate
that.
Oh.
We really hate having to call a print journalist to get help on something. There's just a weird line of demarcation that we like to try and maintain sometimes. So, but this figure that he had for the value of the team and the stadium or the arena, it was nowhere else. It wasn't in Forbes. It wasn't really anywhere. So, but it was a key part of the story if I was going to have to do the reporting on it. So I think I got his number from Katie Brown and called him and said, hey, I really hate to bother you, but can I get your help on this? I don't know where you got this number, but I need to either quote you or maybe you can let me know where you got it. And so, and that was just a conversation that began and really has never ended. An energy there that was mutual, and I really, that's an aspect of our relationship that I love, which is that we do both have this journalism background and this love for writing. And so, you know, when he writes columns, I look them over. I'm his like first copy editor, and it's really fun to like engage, you know, with your best friend that way and talk about this craft that you both love so much.
Well, I'm going to get back to that a little bit, but when you talked about what we used to call following the newspaper in the newsroom, there was a time at KGW when in that morning, I would listen to like KEX or KXL radio coming into the station, and they were basically reading from Associated Press copy that the Associated Press got from the Oregonian.
Yeah.
So it went Oregonian Morning News, AP copy, radio, and then I'd sit in our meeting, and we had a news director that time that we would go over some stuff, and then he'd start going, well, what about X story and Y story and B story? And they were all stories that I had heard on KX radio, and I knew right where they came from. I mean, sometimes I would even come in and I'd write down 3 stories that I'd heard on the radio that I knew came from the AP, that Oregonian, and that this news director would say, we got to start looking into this, like he had, you know, that he had like some inside sources on stories. And it's like, dude, that's like 4th generation. And you know, it happens all the time, and you have to do it sometimes because the newspaper was just much better at that time of breaking strong stories. And it was, but he was given this impression that he knew stuff when I know he didn't, because I listened to the same stuff anyway. I really love your husband's writing. I've told him this before, but there's some stuff that he gets that into his column that just amazes me. The things that he knows, the people he talks to. You know, there was one time I talked to him. It was like at Marcus Mariota after a loss in the Rose Bowl or something like that, and John wrote about some interaction he had with parents outside the locker room that was just heartwarming and realistic, and the essence of sports has nothing to do with the you know, the total yards in the game. And I was just thinking, how the hell was John Canzano standing in that right spot? You know, it was just amazing, and he does that all the time. He's just really damn good at it, and then he's had such a great career on the radio. It just shows what I've come across a lot of sports reporters and columnists that were really good, but they would have been squat on the radio. But John's excellent. I'm glad you're part of his show.
Yeah, you know, I'm really proud of him because, you know, the key in this industry is your ability to evolve. Can you adapt and evolve with the times? And so I'm really proud of how he's evolved from, you know, being a writer, working in print, even doing TV, you know, with KGW and various entities, really. And then this radio show that he's been doing for, you know, so long now. I can't believe it's, you know, it just keeps going. But I think the credit that I give to him is he's so much of a relationship person himself. Like, I think that he develops a lot of trust with the sources who work with him. He is really good at maintaining those relationships over a long period of time. And frankly, I think his philosophy in covering major events is very similar, you know, to there's a famous story about JFK's memorial service. And it was the writer who didn't follow the crowd to look at all the people and all of the pomp and circumstance, but turned and looked in the other direction and saw the man who was digging the grave for JFK, and wrote about the man who was digging the grave and what it meant to him, and how sad he was to be, you know, doing that job for this assassinated president. And so I think John kind of always has that philosophy, as journalists should, where it's like, oftentimes the press conference is really not the story. Where all of the people flood to, that's often not the story. It's like,
Look over there.
over there, look in the opposite direction, look at the reaction shot, because there's the action and the reaction. And I think he just kind of has developed that skill of looking for that and finding it.
I remember once covering the Portland State volleyball team. They were hosting the national championship and they were going to win. And I had a photographer, shooting the volleyball match. And I said, don't follow the ball, just shoot the Portland State girls. Because if you follow the ball and you see that it's in or out, you miss the best part, which is the reaction. And not that I was any great genius, but when you could just, you didn't have to see where the ball went. You could tell what happened by watching them.
Yeah.
I did it with a kicker once with a game-winning field goal. They were kicking with no time left. It was either going to win or lose the game. And I told the photographer, don't follow the ball. You're going to know what happened by following the kicker. So that look the other way.
Because the story is often not where the ball is, it's the reaction. It's the hug that Marcus Mariota gets from his dad outside of a really tough game. It's those moments.
So I had another question about you and your husband, and you were Anna Song. You have your ethnic background, which in our business can be a value as far as diversity.
Yeah.
You got married and you changed your name on the air, which many women haven't done.
Yeah.
Some do, some don't. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious why you went, why you decided that that's what you wanted to do on the air.
It was a big decision because I'd been known as Anna Song for so long. But there was a big part of me that wanted to be married in my whole life. Like I didn't want to have like two personalities and two names and try to maintain both. I just wanted to be married. I wanted to be known as Anna Canzano, like 360. But that was just a personal decision for me. It did take a lot of adjusting. It took about a year of me like accidentally signing out. I would be like, reporting for KATU News, Anna Canzano. Steve, Deb would be like tossing either back to me or whatever, or tossing to me, and they would do it too. We all kind of had to like get used to my new last name for a while, so it was awkward. The best part was when on the weekends it's a pretty skeleton staff, so I would often like answer the phones. So I answered the phone one weekend after the newscast, and this lady called in and said, "I'm really confused. You've got a girl working now named Anna Canzano, and I swear she looks like she could be the sister of who used to be Anna Song." So I had to explain to her, "I'm sorry, I'm the same person. I just changed my last name." So it's made for interesting conversations along the way.
That's awesome. I was just curious because again, for people that want to go to certain markets, LA being one, or certain ethnicities are of value in the diversity of a news staff. And so, I mean, because I know one guy that worked who was Hispanic, but his name was quite Caucasian. But when he got into the business, he changed his name to Carlos because he wanted to be working in LA where there's a high Hispanic population, and he thought that would help him.
Oh, wow.
And
there's people who, that's interesting that he changed his first name. Most people just change their last name. So like I've had friends in the business take on their mother's maiden name, which was more ethnic sounding. It's an interesting dynamic in news. Canzano, by the way, actually the root of it means song in Italian. So
cool.
I was kind of just making a change to a different language.
But I had somebody when I first started out. who was a longtime veteran in the newsroom, saying that he had wished he had changed his name, had an on-air name, nothing to do with ethnicity at all. Just, he was Joe Smith, and he said he would have been better being Joe Jones, just so his family could have some anonymity. This is somebody who was in the business for a long, long, long time, but I never thought about doing that. But some people do the same thing. I know the great Craig Walker, radio personality. I know him by his real off-air name. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. Well, one of the great things about, as I let you go so you can get ready for your radio gig, is not only is the Bald Faced Truth a great radio show, but you and John have a wonderful foundation that helps kids. And I think you guys should be very proud of how you can extend uh, that community that's part of his radio show to do so much help outside of just being on the radio.
Oh, it's so fun, Carl. That's like the highlight of my year.
Yeah.
This year we had our 7th camp. We weren't able to have it last year because of COVID. And the camp is called Camp Exceptional. And for a week, we team up people, kids who are neurotypical and typical in physical manner with kids who have special needs. So, the teams will have people with Downs. They'll have people who are on all ends of the spectrum. We take everyone. And we do a sports camp, and it's totally doable. You just have to make some adjustments along the way to adapt the sports to fit, people's needs. And we had an incredible team of volunteers this year from Portland State and from Clackamas Community College, student athletes who came out. So we had these like giant 300-pound football players bending down to tie shoelaces of, 5 and 6-year-olds. And it is so incredible to see. We have a kid who has been coming for a couple of years to the camp who's nonverbal, and this year he said the word thank you.
Yeah.
His one-on-one, and he said it in front of his mom and his grandmother and his dad, and it was incredible. So it's a week of getting kids involved and athletic and sports, and letting kids who have special needs participate in a way where they can try new things and be supported in it. And by the end of the week, the typical kids come away with compassion and patience and understanding that we're all different. We all have things that we're really good at and things that we're not so good at. And the cool thing is, by the end of the week, a lot of the typical kids, they didn't even know that that person on their team has like an IEP or a special need. And that's really the beauty of it. And my family runs it, and we have cooking competitions at my house every night. So for like a week and a half, we have dinners with like 22 people. It's really chaotic. There's a lot of socks and towels all over our house. We cram everyone into my house, and it's just a blast. It's great.
Good. Well, you guys should be very proud of that. I know how important it is to those kids. So, Anna, it's been a pleasure to talk with you again. We've chatted many times, when we worked together for 9 years, but I just can't say, I know for a fact, my career did a lot of different things. I was never the investigative reporter that you were and that Carrie Tomlinson was. And Dan, I used to just always look over my shoulder and be so proud that I was in the same newsroom as you guys. I just always admire your work. And you're a pretty cool person too, Anna. So it's very nice to have crossed paths with you.
That means so much to me. And I learned a lot from you, the times that we got to anchor together. I never thought of myself as an anchor. So I always was very fortunate, I felt like, to work alongside you and all of the great anchors. But in particular you, because you have a very good attention to detail. Like, you were a really good fact checker. And I remembered working with you and watching you be very diligent about reading through each of the scripts that you would read for the newscast that day, asking questions about stories, and really like prioritizing accuracy within the newscast. And so I appreciated that, because I think it really, as a younger anchor, it helped me a lot in terms of framing, okay, what is my role in this newsroom? So I appreciated the time I got to work with you.
I'm glad you noticed. All right, I'm gonna let you know because you got to be a radio star. Please say hi to your husband for me. And those kids I see on Facebook just look like they're great, well-rounded kids. So I'm guessing that you're as good a parent as you are a reporter. So,
I don't
Anna,
know.
thanks for your time, sweetheart.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.